Imagine the scene. A throne room. A king seated on his throne. Beside him, a second throne, meant for his queen. But on that throne sits no living woman. Only a decaying corpse. This is no myth. It was the command of King Pedro of Portugal. And one by one, the greatest nobles of the realm, the very same who once wished her dead, now approach, kneel, and kiss the hand of that corpse. What was this? An act of love that defied death? Or the ultimate madness, born from grief and revenge? To understand why a king forced his entire court to kneel before the body of his dead lover, we must go back to the beginning, to a story of forbidden passion, blood, and vengeance that waited years to erupt. The year was 1325, in the mist-covered lands of Galicia, on the northwestern edge of the Iberian Peninsula. A girl was born, a girl whose name would echo through history, not for her conquests or holiness, but for her tragedy. Her name was Inês de Castro. She was the daughter of Pedro Fernandez de Castro, Lord of Lemos and Sarria, a man of immense power and ambition, and his beautiful mistress, Doña Aldonza Lorenzo de Ladares. From the moment she took her first breath, Ines was marked by fate. Royal blood ran through her veins, thick and noble, but cursed with the stain of illegitimacy. In a world where a marriage license was worth more than birthright, and a lawful name meant everything, her beauty and lineage were both her crown and her curse. The House of Castro was ancient and proud, but its power made it both a prize and a threat. Ines grew up surrounded by the whispers of intrigue, learning early that a wrong word, a wrong look, could end a life. She studied Latin, wrote poetry, mastered court etiquette, and most importantly, she learned how to listen, how to survive. They called her the Swan Neck for her grace, her warmth, her wheat-colored hair, and eyes that, they said, could see straight through a soul. But behind that soft face lived a sharp mind, the mind of a woman born into a game of kings. At that time, the Iberian Peninsula was a boiling cauldron of alliances and betrayals. The Christian kingdoms, Portugal, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, were forever at war with one another, even while fighting the Moors in the south. Portugal, pressed between the might of Castile and the endless Atlantic, was a fortress struggling to stay free. Its ruler, King Afonso IV, known as the Brave, was a hard, pragmatic man, a king forged by necessity. To him, his children were chess pieces, tools to secure the kingdom's future. He married off his daughter, Maria, to the King of Castile, hoping for peace. Instead, Castile humiliated her. Her husband openly took a mistress. That betrayal hardened Afonso's heart and taught him to fear love that defied control. When Inés arrived at the Castilian court as a young lady in waiting, she was barely 15. She served Constanza Manuel, a noblewoman soon to be wed to Portugal's crown prince, Infante Pedro. It was a diplomatic marriage, nothing more. A calculated exchange of bloodlines meant to keep the peace. But destiny had other plans. When the bridal procession left Castile for Lisbon, Inés rode among the attendants. The journey was long, mountains, rivers, and the dusty roads of Iberia. She couldn't know that each mile brought her closer, not to a foreign court, but to her own ruin and her immortality. The Portuguese court in Lisbon was colder, quieter, more suspicious than Castile's. King Afonso ruled with iron caution, but his son Prince Pedro was everything his father was not. Young, passionate, impulsive, and haunted by a restless melancholy. He obeyed duty, but not willingly. He married Constanza as commanded, but he felt nothing for her. She was pious, gentle, and entirely uninteresting. And then one day, among the faces of her attendants, he saw her. No chronicler agrees on where they met. Perhaps a glance across the throne room, perhaps a meeting in the palace gardens. It doesn't matter. From that moment on, for Pedro, the world divided into two halves, before Ines and after. He fell in love, hopelessly, completely, recklessly. And Ines, perhaps she loved him too. Or perhaps she saw in him not just a man, but a path, a chance to rise above her cursed birth. Historians still argue about it. But love, or fate, doesn't care for debates. What began as a secret spark soon grew into a fire no one could ignore. By 1342, everyone at court whispered about the prince and his wife's Galician handmaid. Pedro had children with Constanza, heirs to the throne. But his heart, his thoughts, his every breath belonged to another woman. He spoke to her as to an equal. He trusted her with state matters. He showered her family with gifts and power. And in doing so, he set the kingdom on fire. King Afonso saw it clearly. This wasn't a love affair. It was a political disaster. The Castros, Inez's powerful relatives, were already tightening their grip on Lisbon. Her brothers were gaining titles, land, and influence. The king feared that soon, Portugal itself would fall under Castilian control. Its heir ruled not by reason, but by passion. To Afonso, Inês de Castro wasn't just a woman. She was a fracture in the fortress of the realm. And that fracture was widening. If you think you know how stories of forbidden love end, you're not ready for this one. Because when love becomes stronger than a crown, and grief stronger than reason, even death is not the end. For King Afonso IV, love was never a matter of the heart. It was a matter of state. And the love between his son and that Galician woman, that bastard daughter of the House of Castro, was not romance. It was treason wrapped in silk. He had spent decades fighting to keep Portugal free from the shadow of Castile. Now he saw his own heir, falling under the spell of a woman born of Castilian blood. Her brothers, ambitious and cunning, had become loud voices at court. Her family's influence grew with every smile, every favor, every whisper from the prince's ear. To Afonso, it was clear. If this went on, Portugal itself would become a Castilian puppet. Constanza, the lawful wife, lived in humiliation. She had fulfilled her duty, borne her husband's children, yet was forced to watch him adore her own handmaid. At court, she was pitied in public and mocked in private. But she was not foolish. She understood politics. And she decided to strike back, not with swords, but with faith. When her son was born, she made a move of cruel genius. She asked Inês de Castro to be the child's godmother. It was a trap forged in the laws of the Church. For in the eyes of God, the spiritual bond between godparents and parents was sacred. It made them family. Any union between them, any touch, any kiss, would be seen not as sin, but as incest. If Inés agreed, she would trap herself in a holy cage. If she refused, she would insult the princess publicly and reveal the truth of her affair. Either way, she would lose. But love, or defiance, won again. Some say Ines rejected the offer. Others whisper she accepted and simply ignored it. Whichever it was, her sin grew heavier in the eyes of the church, and her power at court even greater. Constanza's last weapon had failed. She was queen without a husband, a wife without dignity. Her life was now a slow death. King Afonso could bear it no longer. He summoned his son to the throne room. We can only imagine what was said between them. A king and a prince, a father and a son. Perhaps Afonso pleaded for reason, for duty, for honor, for the future of the realm. Perhaps Pedro spoke of love, or perhaps he said nothing at all. Only silence and defiance. The meeting ended in failure. Afonso knew then persuasion would not save his kingdom, so he used force. In 1344, the king issued a royal decree. Inês de Castro was to be exiled. She was torn from Lisbon and sent away to the fortress of Albuquerque on the Castilian border. It was meant to be a lesson, a warning, a cure for his son's obsession. Out of sight, out of mind. But passion doesn't fade with distance, it sharpens. Separated by walls and miles, Pedro and Ines turned their love into legend. They exchanged secret letters. He made clandestine journeys across the border, risking his life and crown, just to see her. Each forbidden meeting made them stronger, bolder, more reckless, and in his father's eyes, more dangerous. The old king had underestimated his son's will. He thought exile would end the scandal. Instead, it fanned the flames. The prince's rebellion was no longer a rumor. It was alive, breathing, growing. At last, Afonso gave in. He allowed Ines to return. Better to keep his enemies where he could see them than beyond the border. But by doing so, he invited the serpent back into his own garden. The court split in two. On one side, the old nobility, loyal to the king, men who saw the Castros as parasites from across the border. On the other, the youth, loyal to Pedro, drawn to his fire and his defiance. Lisbon became a palace of whispers. Every dinner, every sermon, every dance. Another battle in an invisible war. Everyone knew something terrible was coming. They just didn't know when. Then fate intervened. Constanza, the lawful queen, fell ill. Childbirth had weakened her. Years of humiliation had broken her spirit. In 1345, she died. The court mourned her in black veils and candlelight, but beneath the surface, hearts beat faster. For her death changed everything. Ines was no longer the prince's mistress. She could become his wife. And that, for King Afonso, was a nightmare made flesh. Pedro was free, legally, morally, spiritually. He could finally marry the woman he had loved for a decade, and he declared, boldly, that he would do exactly that. Afonso was furious. It was no longer about lust, it was about power. He forbade the marriage outright. He had his reasons, and none were moral. Ines was illegitimate, a bastard. To make her queen would stain the royal bloodline, invite mockery from every court in Europe. Worse, she was Galician, a daughter of Castile. Her coronation would open the gates to foreign power Afonso had fought all his life to keep out. And beyond that, it would dishonor the memory of Constanza and her noble house. It would undo the alliances that held the kingdom together. Afonso could not and would not allow it. But Pedro was his father's son, as stubborn as he was passionate. When the king forbade him to marry, He did it anyway, without permission, without blessing, without shame. He left Lisbon. He and Ines withdrew to Coimbra, to the monastery of Santa Clara of Vela, a sanctuary of love surrounded by walls of hostility. There, they lived like husband and wife. And there, their children were born. Beatriz in 1347, João in 1349, Dennis in 1354. Each child was a joy to them and a threat to the king. To Afonso, those children were ticking bombs, illegitimate heirs who could one day challenge his grandson, the rightful prince, born of Constanza. He saw the makings of a civil war, a war that would tear Portugal apart after his death. For 10 long years, the old king watched this danger grow. He tried persuasion, he tried exile, he tried threats. Nothing worked. Pedro's love had become something unstoppable, something closer to obsession, even to madness. And so, in the winter of 1354, the king made his choice. If the sickness could not be cured, it must be cut out. Winter. The year, 1355. King Afonso Fontfort sat in silence, surrounded by his most trusted men. Their names would soon be carved into legend and into infamy. Pedro Coelho, Álvaro Gonçalves, Diogo López Pacheco. They were not assassins. They were nobles, statesmen, men who believed they were about to save their kingdom, not stain it with blood. Afonso's voice was calm as steel. He had no joy in the order he gave, but no hesitation either. "If love has blinded my son," he said, "then we must open his eyes, with pain." And so it was decided. Inês de Castro, the woman who had bewitched the heir to Portugal, was to die. It was January 7th, 1355, a quiet day in Coimbra. The monastery of Santa Clara of Vela lay under gray skies. Inside, Ines lived her fragile peace, a peace surrounded by her children, by gardens, by the illusion of safety. Pedro was away, hunting. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps not. The 3 men rode in silence. Their mission was sealed by royal command. No trial, no warning, no escape. When they arrived, the monastery gates opened to the king's banner. The monks stepped aside. No one dared interfere. Legends say Ines was in the garden when she saw them, 3 riders in black, their swords catching the pale light of the morning. She knew. In that instant, she knew why they had come. She didn't beg for her life. She fell to her knees, not for herself, but for her children. Beatriz, João, little Dennis, too young to understand the terror around them. She clutched them close, her tears falling onto their hair. "Please," she whispered. "If not for me, then for them." Her voice broke. The killers hesitated. Even hardened men can falter before a mother's plea. For a moment, a single trembling heartbeat, they might have turned back. They might have lived as men, not executioners. But the king's will was absolute, and somewhere, perhaps in the shadows of the monastery, perhaps only in their minds, his command echoed again. "Do it." The hesitation ended. Steel flashed. The courtyard filled with the sound of screaming. Children, servants, monks. And then, silence. When it was done, Inês de Castro lay on the cold earth, her blood seeping into the soil of Coimbra. Some say her head was struck clean from her shoulders. Others say she was stabbed again and again, until her beauty was gone, but her eyes remained open. Eyes that would haunt them all. Near the monastery stood a small estate, Quinta das Lágrimas, the estate of tears. There, a fountain still flows, Fonte das Lágrimas, the fountain of tears. They say its stones are still tinged with red, that the water's eternal murmur is her weeping, the weeping of a queen who never ruled, of a mother who died in the name of power. When Pedro returned from the hunt, the world he knew ended. He rode into the courtyard where they had killed her. He saw the blood, the broken toys, the emptiness, no body, only absence and rage. Something inside him shattered. The man who had loved died that day. And in his place was born something else, a shadow in human form. Pedro, the lover, was gone. Pedro, the avenger, rose. He didn't mourn quietly. He gathered his men, Galicians, loyalists, anyone who would follow. He raised his banner and called his father by his name. Not king, not father, but enemy. In 1355, Portugal was torn apart. Father against son, crown against blood. Castles burned, villages starved. Brother fought brother. Pedro's army swept through the land like a storm. He did not seek the throne. He sought retribution. He wanted their heads. The three who had done it, Coelho, Gonçalves, Pacheco, he wanted them alive so he could make them suffer. For 2 years, the kingdom bled. At last, through the desperate pleas of Queen Beatrice, Afonso's wife, Pedro's mother, a truce was forged. Father and son met face to face. They spoke little. Too much had been said already. Some say Afonso begged forgiveness. Some say he only wept. Pedro's heart was stone. He agreed to peace, but in his silence burned a promise. That promise would not fade. It would wait, and it would be fulfilled. A few months later, Afonso IV was dead. The throne passed to Pedro, the lover, the avenger, the king, and the first thought that filled his heart was not of his crown, nor of his country, but of her. The year 1357. Portugal had a new king, Pedro the lover, the avenger, the mad. Call him what you will. His reign began with fire, blood, and silence. For 2 years he had waited. 2 years since the murder. 2 years since the last breath of Inês de Castro. Now, at last, the crown was his, and so was vengeance. The first thing he did as king was to open the graves. He ordered the killers hunted across the continent. Pedro Coelho and Álvaro Gonçalves were found in Castile, dragged back in chains. Diogo Lopes Pacheco escaped to France and would live out his life in exile, haunted by what he had done. But the other two, they would face their king. The chronicles say the executions were public. They say the king himself was present. And what happened next belongs to the darkest pages of human history. He had their hearts torn out, Coelho's through his chest, Gonçalves's through his back, so they could see the punishment from both sides of betrayal. Some say Pedro watched without flinching. Others say he smiled. What we know is this. When it was over, he said, "Now, my heart is at peace." But it was not. It never would be. The court tried to move on. Wars ended, borders calmed. Yet the king's grief remained a living thing. He refused to remarry. He refused to forget. Then, one night, he made a command no one could understand. He ordered the tomb of Inês de Castro to be opened. It was done in secret, they say, by torchlight, in the silence of the monastery. When they lifted the stone lid, a wave of air escaped. heavy, sweet, and foul. Inside lay what was once the most beautiful woman in Portugal, now only bones wrapped in shadow. But Pedro did not turn away. He looked at her face, or what was left of it, and whispered words no one heard. Then he gave the order that would make him immortal in legend. He commanded that she be crowned. The monks stared in disbelief. The courtiers murmured in horror. But the king's word was law. And so, by royal decree, Inês de Castro, dead for 2 years, was proclaimed Queen of Portugal. The court gathered in the great hall. Thousands of candles burned, tapestries draped in mourning black. At the center, a throne, and upon it, the corpse of the queen. They dressed her in silk and jewels. They placed a golden crown upon her skull. And when all was ready, the king rose and spoke. "She is my wife. She is my queen. And she shall have the honor that life denied her." Then he turned to the nobles, the same men who had once spat her name in whispers, and gave the final command: "Kneel before the queen." And they did. One by one, trembling, pale, the greatest lords and ladies of Portugal approached. They knelt, and they kissed her hand, the hand of a corpse. Some said the flesh was still cold. Others said it crumbled at their touch. No one forgot. No one ever would. The coronation of the dead queen marked the peak of Pedro's reign and his madness. Afterward, he ruled in near isolation. He would visit her tomb every day, speak to her as if she still listened, and commission her effigy in white marble. So lifelike, the travelers swore she seemed asleep. He ordered a second tomb for himself, facing hers, so that when Judgment Day came, they would rise and see each other first. 2 coffins of stone, 2 crowns of eternity. Side by side in the monastery of Alcobaça. They are still there. Her face, serene, untouchable. His, hard, unyielding. The distance between their tombs is the width of a single heartbeat. And above them, carved into marble, the words that define them both. Até ao fim do mundo, until the end of the world.